September 1942, Stalingrad, the grain elevator. A small group of Soviet soldiers, around 30 men, are defending an industrial grain elevator on the southern edge of the city. They've held it for 5 days against overwhelming German forces. The men have almost no ammunition and water remaining. In the dark, in the dust, in the heat, many are wounded. They hold because this is their city and this is the motherland. These are comrades. They were finally overrun, and only a handful escaped through the German lines at night. The Germans who took the building afterwards were so impressed by the resistance that one of their officers, Wilhelm Hoffmann, actually wrote about it in his diary. Now, elsewhere in Stalingrad, similar scenes were playing out across the city. Fierce resistance against the German advance. True heroes stopping the Nazi army from taking the city. And yet, these stands were the bait being eaten. The grain elevator group was not strategically necessary in any operational sense. The defense cost the Germans about a week of momentum and consumed disproportionate German resources. That cost, multiplied across the dozens of similar stands throughout the city, was the entire strategic point. Men inside the grain elevator did not know they were bait. They thought they were holding ground that mattered. They were holding the German army's attention while 1 million Soviet soldiers prepared a very different war out on the steppe. The book today is Stalingrad by Anthony Beevor, published in 1998. Beevor was a British Army officer before he became a historian, and you can feel that in the writing. He understands, you feel, the men who are the real-life characters here. The book is rigorously sourced, no doubt. He was one of the first Western historians to be authorized to work in the Soviet archives after they opened in the early 90s. And the book reads in places like a thriller. It runs about 500 pages. It's not light reading, but the writing does move, and Beevor has the rare gift of being able to hold the eye of the sergeant on the ferry and the eye of the field marshal in the same paragraph. Almost every retelling of Stalingrad treats the city fight as the center of gravity. The urban combat, the snipers, the rubble, the grain elevator, Pavlov's house heroics. These are famous. They make Stalingrad. They don't make the moonshot. So, moonshot. The moonshot is what was happening behind the city fight while the world watched. Operation Uranus. By late summer 1942, the Soviet High Command, and specifically here Zhukov and Vasilevsky, had identified a strategic opportunity that the German army had handed them. The German 6th Army was the most experienced formation in the Wehrmacht, and they were being drawn into the city. Its flanks, hundreds of kilometers out in the open steppe to the north and south of the city, were being held not by German troops, but by Romanian and Italian armies, very much under-equipped and demoralized. If you could keep the 6th Army's attention fixed on the city, utterly fixed, so fixed that they forgot to look up, you could assemble a 2nd Army on those flanks in secret and snap the pincers shut behind them. 1 million men, hundreds of tanks, thousands of guns, moved into position over several months, only at night and under absolute radio silence. Now, here is the dark heart of it. The Germans missed it because they had told themselves the Russians couldn't do it. Stalin had specifically banned encirclement doctrine, cauldrons, after the catastrophic failures of 1941, when the Germans had used the same tactic to destroy entire Soviet army groups. By late 1942, German intelligence had the Soviets pegged as incapable of large-scale envelopment. In the moonshot method, I describe navigation as the strategic vector, the why and the where of an attempt. In episode 1, it was William of Normandy's navigation, stamped by the Pope carrying a holy banner. This today is the dark mirror. Zhukov's navigation is the concealment of conquest, the 1 million men hidden under the snow. And the bait? The thing keeping the German eye fixed on the wrong place is Chuikov's 62nd Army inside the city. 40,000 men ferried in to die in the rubble at a rate those little Volga ferries could barely keep up. Not there to win, but to be eaten slowly by the machine. That is the moonshot. The city was the cover story. Now, Uranus could have failed, and 3 moments in particular stand out here. First of all, Zhukov persuaded Stalin to authorize in absolute secrecy the very tactic Stalin had outlawed. Zhukov and Vasilevsky had to persuade Stalin, a pretty bad-tempered, ruthless tyrant with a cowardly streak, that they could beat the 6th Army after a long battle, or they could choose to annihilate it by encircling the entire army. Now this is how the German armies had perfected their rapid advances. This was also what Stalin had banned. Now Zhukov, after the war, wrote the two men spoke to Stalin alone in a small room, and they only took blank paper and pencils to make their case. In the end, very reluctantly, Stalin gave the two men permission to move forward. The second is during the build-up. The Italian and Romanian armies protecting the flanks noticed the build-up of troops and equipment. They reported it. Beaver has those reports. They were dismissed by the German staff, who had decided what the Soviet army was capable of, and the Romanian observations did not fit the picture. So the observations were discarded rather than the picture. Sixth Army's flank collapsed in the end in less than 48 hours when Uranus opened on the 19th of November. Those warnings had been sitting in filing cabinets for weeks. The third moment is a bit harder. The standard story of Stalingrad is that Hitler refused permission to break out and the army was lost. The harder version of this story, and the one that I think Beaver handles more carefully than most others, is that by the time Hitler made that decision, the breakout was probably no longer possible anyway. Paulus had not prepared for one. The fuel had been pulled south months earlier towards the Caucasus. Tank crews had been sent in as infantry during urban fighting. Many of the tanks themselves didn't work anymore. They were short of parts, short of fuel, broken down. The army inside the Kessel, the cauldron, was not a coherent mobile force ready to march or break out. It was an exhausted infantry force. Paulus, in charge of the Sixth Army, was really a staff officer. He was very methodical, organized, very, very, very rule-bound. He was promoted to army command late in his career, and principally on the strength of his planning. He was very much the wrong person for a moment that required defiance of the Führer. Manstein got this, and at one point in December asked Paulus, indirectly, to take responsibility himself. Paulus refused. He kept on asking Hitler for permission until the situation had very much become unrecoverable. The question that haunts this story is whether Paulus knew. He was very good at planning. He was a very capable staff officer. Did he know how bad things were? Paulus survived the war. He spent 10 years as a Soviet prisoner, testified at Nuremberg, and he lived out his last years in East Germany. He wrote his version of Stalingrad, edited and published after his death by his son. The papers are careful. They explain, they justify. They don't, as far as I could find, give us the sentence that settles the question of, did he know? Did he know how bad things were? And we are left with what he was prepared to write down, which is not the same as what he saw. Most accounts of audacious moonshots tell you about the visible attempt, the army that crossed the channel, the men inside the burning city, the men who stepped on the ice. What this episode argues is that the visible attempt is usually downstream of three quiet pieces of work. The work of persuading the authority that the attempt should be allowed, the work of concealing the attempt from those who would stop it, and the work, often unwitting, of the people whose visible struggle keeps the attention while the real work happens elsewhere. The part that really stayed with me after I read this book for the first time, that these were real people. There were real people in that grain elevator, in that city, in those improvised bunkers out on the plains, the German private who never understood what kind of war he'd been fighting. Those men inside the grain elevator who thought they were holding ground that mattered. The cost of this concealment was paid by people who did not know that they were paying it. Okay, next time we're moving to a very different place. Christmas Eve 1968. 3 men in a small spacecraft on the far side of the moon look back at Earth for the first time in human history. Robert Kerson's Rocket Man, the story of Apollo 8, the audacious mid-program pivot that turned the lunar program around in 4 months. An amazing achievement. Until then, go and read Beaver. Not light reading, but it is the kind of book that changes what you think a moonshot can be. I'm Mark Zunderman. This has been Contact Light the Bookshelf. Thank you for listening.